I'm Tim Donovan, Chancellor of the Vermont State Colleges. It's wonderful for me to be here and see a lot of old friends and acquaintances. I love this event. It brings folks together that don't oftentimes get to see one another. It also gives us a chance to think about some things that we oftentimes don't carve the time out to think about. But mostly what I love about it is it comes right on the heels of most of our commencements. I spent Saturday and Sunday at commencements at Vermont Technical College and at Linden. Sorry to have missed Castleton and Johnson. But those events for me are a reminder of why we all do what we do. It also is a reminder for me of the enormous range of our colleges, the distinctiveness of our institutions, how that plays out in terms of what your commencement rituals are, that I can assure you are different. The sacred things to you are different than the sacred things at another college, but they're sacred. And the way that you celebrate with your students, the way you celebrate your faculty, the way you celebrate the institution, in every case is different. And that this comes on the heels of that is just a great reminder, I know for me and I hope for you. I want to thank Dr. Gardner, who has left for the airport, but for a really insightful presentation this morning. I also want to thank, we have 4 trustees from the VSC board who are here, at least were here this morning. Is Gary still here? Gary Moore, chair of the board, was here this morning. Gary will leave the board in February, having served 24 years, which is an amazing accomplishment, but he's a person who is that kind of public servant. Also here, Heidi Pelletier from Montpelier. Heidi, could you raise your hand? Karen Luno from St. Albans. And Jim Maslin, and I'm going to forget exactly the town. Thetford, thank you. These folks are among 14 board members who are appointed by either the governor or the legislature. Legislators serve 4-year terms, gubernatorial appointments serve 6-year terms. It's an enormous amount of time on their part. They care deeply about these colleges and how we serve the state of Vermont. So I'd like to chat very briefly this afternoon about 3 things. And I want to first start with some observations or comments from Dr. Gardner's talk this morning. As he talked about the T-shaped student or the T-shaped professional, and he talked about it in terms of Michigan State University and Boise State University, big places. I mean, our colleges are smaller than departments at some of those places. And it strikes me that one of the opportunities that we have in our size, in our relationships with our students and our relationships with our colleagues across departments, is a unique ability that we may have to do some of those cross-disciplinary and cross-systems approaches with our students and engage them in things that are cross-discipline and cross-systems. He also talked about internships. And I have to agree with him that this internships right now in the minds of public policymakers are the silver bullet. And I wouldn't deny that a well-done, well-planned internship can be invaluable. But a badly done or badly planned internship is worse than doing none. So I would ask us to look at the other of the big circles on his graphic, which had to do with applied research with faculty and students. That's something we can do at a scale that makes an enormous amount of sense. Our communities, these colleges, the campus colleges, are in rural communities. They're not close to lots of employers. But there's lots of work that can be done, and Johnson in particular has really made this a focus of some of their work in recent years. You see it in their advertising. Engaging faculty in real research in response to local issues, bringing value not only to the students, but to the college, to the faculty member, and to the community. And third, I was thinking about the key competencies that he talked about, and I know some of you were taking notes furiously, but the key competencies, and they resonated with me in terms of things that we know that our students are going to face. And it struck me that those ought to be things that we think about, do we face them? Do we, in ourselves and in our organizations, do we seek to not only become competent at those key areas, but model them for our students? So when you get the slide deck later on, I'd ask you to go back and look at it in that regard. The other point that Dr. Gardner made a couple of times was about regulation and public policy. He's right in his observation that those things tend to lag about 20 years behind what's actually happening in the workplace. It's true of educational policy. Most of our educational policy is predicated on an 18-year-old leaving high school, going to one place for 4 years, and graduating. That may represent the experience of most congressional aides who probably write these regulations. But it doesn't represent the reality in this country of people starting, stopping, changing, and that's true young or old. And I know it's a challenge that we all deal with. When I was here on Saturday at the VTC graduation, and there's a lot of thought about the millennials, and I'm watching 30-year-olds and 40-year-olds and 50-year-olds walking across the stage. It's a very diverse population that we serve. And we serve a population that is predominantly first-generation college goers. So some of those gaps he talked about are particularly pertinent to us. Dr. Gardner's first slide, if you recall, was a young student holding up an iPad with her regalia coming out of it nicely, and behind it was what I think represented the rest of the college community in horror. Our industry, and I use that word broadly, but the industry that we're involved in, the education, not just from a business standpoint, but it's a whole sector, is in stress. We all know that. I've had, for the last year, a pretty interesting window on this. How many of you have been involved in a college's preparation for a NEASC visit? Self-study or meeting with team members? It's a pretty interesting thing, a little stressful, a lot of work that goes into it. How many of you have been on an accreditation team to another institution? Fewer hands. For those of you who are in the rising portion of your career, as opposed to some of us who may be in the waning portions of our career, I would urge you to do this. Through your college, through your president, through your academic dean, apply to be on an accreditation team. It's a lot of work for about a week and a half, and you go and visit another college intensely for about 3 days. but you get into that college in a way. Think about when you're on the receiving end of one of these visits. It's a really wonderful professional development opportunity that will bring back to your college lots of benefits. A year ago, I joined the Commission on Institutions of Higher Education, which is the body that actually makes any accrediting related decisions. And when I joined that group, my friend Dave Finney from Champlain, who was the only other Vermonter on the commission, said to me, we're going to meet 4 times a year, and every one of those meetings is like a graduate course in higher education. There's 253, I think, colleges and universities accredited by NEASC in this region. I'm going to venture to guess that 200 of those you've never heard of, either by proximity or size. They are all stressed, every single one of them, whether you're talking about Harvard and MIT, which we may think are immune, to the smallest little Catholic college hidden away in Rhode Island. They're all stressed. They've seen their assumptions of decades fall away like dominoes. Demographics, the reduction of high school graduates, the preparedness of high school graduates, how we are failing boys in our society right now. Math, I think the critical place that math is right now among math abilities of any sort, whether it's the calculus required of students in some programs at this college, or the statistics that Dr. Gardner referred to as everyone has to be able to understand statistics. We are all stressed. And the thing I've seen over the course of the last year, when I come to these meetings, they send us out 2 weeks in advance materials this high. There's usually 70 or 75 institutions that have some accreditation issue before the commission, is how institutions respond to this stress. And an oversimplification would be one of 2 ways. They circle the wagons, or they say, okay, what can we do to innovate? What can we do to know our markets? What can we do to know what our students need and do them in different ways? It's in the latter of those things that I think we first of all, the former, circling the wagons, if you watched as many Westerns as I did as a kid, never worked, right? I don't think it works in this setting either. But what does work more often is really focusing and innovating in ways that make sense. Not just for the sake of innovation, but what gets this closer to what our students need and what our students want. So there's 2 innovations that I would like to just mention very briefly that I've seen in the last year, being on the commission. One is, for the first time in the country, as far as I can tell, an institution has been granted authority from an accreditation body and from the U.S. Department of Education to deliver and offer financial aid for a degree program that requires no seat time. It's entirely outcomes-based. It might take you 5 years, it might take you 2 years. It acknowledges what you already know. It puts, you put it together the way you need to. It's offered now in both a 2-year degree and a 4-year degree at Southern New Hampshire University, at what they call the College for America. It's a flat fee, okay? $5,000 for an associate degree. And they're doing some very interesting things. One of the inhibitors from that happening in the past was the Veterans Administration and federal financial aid regulations. And the president of Southern New Hampshire worked through that, and I think it's going to open the doors on really looking at how we look at what are the competencies that we expect and how do people acquire them, and it will open up ways of helping students get those things that aren't related to specifically seat time. The second, and I think this is particularly pertinent for us, I've seen the approval of a degree program offered by 2 institutions, neither of which had that program, and neither of which could probably either assemble the resources to deliver it well or garner enough market to make that work. But the 2 of them believe they can together. And I think this is something we want to think really carefully about in this system. We are small institutions. We are by and large geographically based, each with a really wonderful set of resources, faculty and staff, but not as complete as any of us would like it to have in any one location. We're small institutions. Are there some things that we can bring to the state of Vermont, to the future workforce of Vermont, that we can't figure out or afford to be able to do at one location, at one institution, and do them in partnership and aggregate those resources? And I think, again, we're uniquely situated to be able to do that. So the final thing I'd like to speak about briefly, and if anyone but Steve Zinn can name the group, changes, okay? We're in a time of enormous change. It's not just technology, it's the pace of information, the kind of automation and smart machines that Dr. Gardner talked about this morning. Enormous amounts of changes. In our institutions, there's a number of external factors that are bringing about those changes. Demographics is one, we've talked about that before. The economics of all of this, and I mean in a big sense. We're in a state that does not fund higher education well. You've heard me say this before. I acknowledge it. I wish we had been able to turn the curve on this. We are 49th in the country. Higher ed in this state gets about $80 million a year. That represents a little more than 5% of what we spend on K-12 education in this state. There were 6,500 live births in Vermont last year. And we have an ed fund that covers K-12 of $1.4 billion. And I'll do the math for you. Divide 1.4 billion by 6,500 live births and spread it over 20 years, and it's $12,000 a year. Okay? We're not, as a state, being deliberate about how we make that investment in our young people. And we might argue that, in fact, a K-12 education is no longer the expectation that someone might need to have to compete in this workforce. It may be K-14. It may be K-16. It may be birth 14. And I wouldn't suggest to anyone that the right thing to do is just spread that money over 20 years. You want to load it in the places where it makes the most sense. And most researchers will tell you the biggest place you put it is prenatal through 4. But we're not deliberate about this. On the higher education front, we're 49th in the country, $80 million. If we increased our higher education appropriation in the state to the state colleges, the university, and VSAC by 50%, $40 million more, it would raise us from 49th to 47th. Okay? It isn't going to change quickly. I wish I could wave a wand and say it is, but it's not. But we have to keep working at it. There's also, and I use this word cautiously among educators, among the external factors that involve change is our customers' expectation. And I use the word carefully, and I mean more than just students. Families are our customers. Employers are our customers. The public is our customers. Students are our customers. And those expectations are changing. I know you hear that as well as I do. Internally, we also have some factors that contribute to a pace of change. Also the economics. What it takes to run and do the work that we need to do to deliver the education that we do. What our students' needs are, and you've heard me comment before, inertia is always at work. I also look around the room. This is an audience that's got a lot of our younger employees in it. But we have a generational sea change taking place in our organization, as well as in the state. This is the second oldest state in the country, Maine only being older. And so we're going to have folks who have been important parts of our institutions who will retire. And that's a change we need to be cognizant of as well. In each of these changes, we have some opportunities. Change means transitions. And sometimes those transitions are planned and known in advance, and sometimes they're unexpected. But in those transitions, the opportunities arise for us to really invent. And I mean, I'm talking about whether we're talking about transitions in each of your programs that you teach in or work in, transitions in leadership, transitions in mission. Each of those creates an opportunity for us to all work together to own the challenges, to own the problems, and to own the solutions. It's what's wonderful about a learning community. And I think it will challenge us in ways that are significant in coming years. So let me close with this. I want to thank you for being able to join you today, and thank you for the opportunity that it affords me to see you all and work with you continuously. But finally, I want to thank you for what you do, for what you bring to the mission that we are engaged in. And again, I'm reminded of that at commencement time, when I'll see 250 or 500 students, depending on the institution, crossing a stage, embracing their faculty, being congratulated by their entire community. The joy that comes from that I know means a lot to all of you, or we wouldn't be doing this. So thanks for the chance to be with you today. Have a great rest of the afternoon. Godspeed.